you. But the book and this series is based on this idea that we talked about this last week. The voice can only reproduce what the ear can hear. And if you say it in Valley's talk, the voice can only reproduce what the ear can hear. But we can only hear if we tune in to what we are trying to hear. And that means we've got to shut out the other noises around us. And I just want to address a misconception, because being still, this whole series is not based for Sundays. Being still is not about just sitting in stone silence at church. If you want to sit in silence at church, there's plenty of places for that. But this is bigger. Now, I'm all for moments of quietness. I'm all for moments of contemplation. I'm all for moments of stillness. I think they're great. There is a place for them in our Sunday meetings. Don't mishear me. I think they are really, really important. But this is bigger. This is about our life, not just that hour and a half on a Sunday morning. This is about shutting out noises, not on a Sunday morning, but shutting out noises actually in our life. Because if we think God only speaks on a Sunday morning, can I be challenging and say that's a very, very narrow view of God? God speaks whenever he wants. You know, Hebrews says God spoke in many ways, and he still speaks today. And we have to have those disciplines in our life to say, okay, God, I'm going to listen to you and shut out the noise around me. And I don't know about you, I thought I was getting a bit old. Because it's something I've realized I've been doing for the last couple of years. And it's whenever I've got to drive somewhere, maybe I've got to drive to a house to do a visit, or I've got to drive somewhere for a meeting. And I told this last week, if I've got to go somewhere, I've checked the map 3 weeks in advance. I've checked Google Maps. I've got my sat-nav on. And I'll get to the road that I need to be on. If I'm looking for the house or looking for the church or looking for where I'm going, I'll get to the road and I don't even think about it. But when I'm looking for the house or looking for the building, I reach over, I turn the radio off. Does anyone else do that? Isn't it weird? It's got nothing to do with your eyesight. But we turn down the radio. And I realize this, that sometimes my ability to see is linked to what I'm hearing. That sometimes to see what I want to see, I need to shut out other things going on. So my ability to see in the spiritual sense, if I want to see what God's doing in my life, actually there are things I need to turn down that aren't in that space. And that's what this series is about, how we recognize what those noises are and how we can turn them down or even turn them off so that we can hear clearly what God is saying and we can see what God's doing. But I want to start with a story I heard this week about President George Bush, or former President George Bush. George Bush was in the airport and he's taken a domestic flight and he's stood in the queue waiting to do his check-in, and ahead of him he sees this really, really tall man. And a kind of strikingly tall man. And he looks at this guy, and this guy's got long, long, flowing white hair and a huge white beard. And he looks a bit closer, and he notices this really tall man, he's wearing robes. And George Bush looks a little bit closer, and he notices this man is wearing sandals. So George Bush is watching this man now, and this man gets closer and closer to the check-in, and the man puts down his bag to get his passport out, because obviously robes don't have pockets. So he opens his bag, and George Bush looks, and he sees 2 stone tablets in his bag. So the man goes through check-in, and George Bush actually is a couple of places behind him in the queue, and he waits, and he goes through check-in, they go through security, and he's watching this man. They get into the kind of the duty-free, and this guy is looking at all the honey, and he's looking at all the milk. And George Bush goes up to him and says, "Excuse me, are you Moses?" And the man turned around like a shot. He said, "Yes, I am. Get away from me right now." And George Bush is a little taken aback. He said, "Well, do you know who I am?" And Moses said this, "Yes, I do. And the last time I spoke to a bush, I ended up in the desert for 40 years. Thank you very much. That is the first clap I've had. We're in Exodus chapter 3. If you've got your Bibles, would you turn to Exodus chapter 3? If you haven't got a Bible today, again, take one of ours. They're our gift to you. We never want cost to be a barrier to spiritual growth. If you haven't got a Bible, grab one of ours. And we're going to read from chapter 3 in a moment, but I want to give you a little bit of backstory, just to give you the history of where we are. If you've never heard this story, if you know the story of Joseph and his coat, Joseph and his family, they moved to Egypt. So 12 men and their wives, they all moved to Egypt, and they have families. And their families have families. And their families have families. And their families have families. And 400 years go by, and suddenly there are loads of them. And it makes the Egyptians a little bit nervous because there are so many Israelites, so many Hebrews living in Egypt. So the new Pharaoh, who's never heard of Joseph, he kind of enacts this no-child policy on the Israelites. And so some of the Israelite mothers, they hide their babies. And one of those Israelite mothers, or one of those babies, is Moses. And there's a verse, this is not related to the message, but it's a great principle on stewardship. Because it says this, that when Moses' mother could no longer hide him, she got a basket made of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. She put Moses in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. So she's been hiding this baby for 3 months. Now, probably 3 months is probably the longest you can get away with hiding a baby, because they don't do a lot. But then they get to a point where he's too big, he's too loud for her to hide him any longer, so she puts him in a basket or a box. Really interesting, a little bit of tidbit. It's the same word, the same Hebrew word that they use for Noah's Ark. Same Hebrew word. So she puts him in this box, and basically she hands him over to God's care. And Moses gets picked up by the daughter of Pharaoh, who sees this Hebrew child and decides, well, this Hebrew child, he needs a Hebrew woman to nurse him. And so who does she get? Moses' mother. So Moses' mother places the baby she can't hide anymore into the care of God. Then she gets her baby back, and she gets paid to nurse him. Can I suggest there are things that we know we need to give over to God? Maybe it's our time, maybe it's our service, maybe it's our talents, maybe it's our finances. But look what happens when you do it. It comes back blessed. You're better off for it. So if you are, in a sense, hiding your talent or hiding your ability or hiding your time, you're going to get to a point where you can't hide it anymore. And I want to encourage you, don't throw it away, but give it to God. Put it in his hands, and it'll come back to you better than you gave it. Jesus said this, give and you'll receive. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together to make room for more. He says this, the amount you give will determine the amount you get back. So if you want an hour of your week to be blessed, give an hour. If you want your life to be blessed, give your life. If you want your talents and your abilities to be blessed, give your talents and abilities. If you want your finance to be blessed, give it to God and see what God will do. That's just a side point, by the way, but I just love the principle in that, that she gives her baby back, gives her baby over to God, gets it back, and gets paid to look after her own baby. That's the providence of God. So Moses goes, he lives 40 years. He lives like a prince in the palace, probably like a brother to the Pharaoh. And it's like, have anyone seen Prince of Egypt? So you got Moses and Pharaoh, and Mariah Carey's going, there can be miracles. Have you not seen that film? It's massively unbiblical, but it's a good laugh. Excuse me. So it's all great for Moses. He's living like a prince. And on one day he spots an Egyptian beating an Israelite, and he kills this Egyptian, which in Egyptian culture was a capital offense. If you killed an Egyptian, that meant the death penalty. So Moses runs away, and he finds a job as a shepherd for a man called Jethro, who would later move to Cornwall to be a comedian. And so Moses works for Jethro. He actually marries his daughter, and he spends 40 years living as a shepherd. So he's literally lived half his life as a prince and half his life as a pauper. And one day we pick up this narrative, and Exodus chapter 3 says this, one day. I love the randomness of that phrase. One day. It doesn't say on the 25th of June or on the 5th day of the 3rd month or on Moses' birthday or on his anniversary or on this particular Sunday. It just says one day. Because God can speak on any day he wants to. God might speak to you one day. Out of the blue, God will speak. And I want to suggest for all of us, there's a one day. There's a one day God will get your attention, and it probably won't be on the day you expect it. It might not even be on the day you want it. But it will be one day. And it says, one day Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. So here is Moses. He's at the foot of Mount Sinai, and I've got a picture for you. Sinai was about, we think it was double the height of Snowdon. So just to give you a bit of context there, when Moses climbs up Sinai later on, he's doing Snowdon twice. So it's a pretty big mountain, and he's at the foot of this mountain. If you go there today, there's a monastery called St. Catherine's Monastery. And they think this monastery is where the burning bush was. I don't know how they know that. I'll be really honest. But they think this monastery was the site of the burning bush. It says this, that there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. Now, I don't think at this point, now I know the Bible says, I don't think at this point Moses knew it was God. Because the text says the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses. I don't think Moses knew it was God, because Moses' response, he says, this is amazing. Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go and see it. I want to suggest sometimes God will use other things to get our attention. That we won't know it's God. But he'll take something that looks normal and he'll do something either in our kind of eyes or just to the thing that makes it grab our attention, because a bushfire in those days was probably normal. It was probably something Moses had seen 100 times, but this one was different. So it wasn't the fire that grabbed Moses' attention, it was the fact that the bush wasn't burning. But here's the difference. It wasn't odd, but it was unusual. And it grabs Moses' attention. And sometimes we see things in our life and we go, oh, that's odd. And then we never give it a second thought. Who's done that? You've looked at something or you've seen something and go, that's a bit odd. And then you just walk away and you never entered your mind again. But this is odd. That it grabs Moses' attention and he's saying, okay, and Moses says, okay, I've got to look into this further. And sometimes there'll be moments where God will do something in our life that is just odd. And he's trying to get our attention. And our response should be, I've got to go and see. I've got to get closer to this. I've got to lean into this because there could be more going on here. You know, we remember driving across to Wales to visit my parents when my dad was alive. And we drive across, and my mum and my dad, they lived in Abersycon for a little bit, only for about 18 months. They had this big house in Abersycon. As we drive up through Abersycon, if you've ever been that way, there must be 10 churches on the way that are all shut down, dilapidated, ruined. And we're driving over, and we're just in the car, and Hannah burst into tears. Just burst into tears, seeing all these empty churches. Can I tell you that is odd? And it was the start of a journey that we went on talking about, okay, God, what are you saying here? Because you're doing something that's just a bit odd. And it says this, the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look. God called to him from the middle of a bush. So it's interesting because Moses hears after he steps closer. So here's the question. When we notice something that is odd in our lives, are we willing to step closer to hear if God is going to speak through it? And God says, Moses, if you go through the Bible, whenever God does that, it's a sign of intimacy. Whenever God repeats a name, it's a sign of intimacy. He does it with Abraham. He does it with Joseph. He does it with Moses. Jesus does it with Martha. And Jesus on the cross, he says, my God, my God. It's a sign of intimacy. So God is not just pulling Moses into wonder, but he's pulling Moses into relationship. He's saying, I want some intimacy with you. It's not just about God getting my attention. It's about God pulling me close so that I can hear his voice. And Moses says, here I am. I think they're probably my favorite 3 words in the Bible. Here I am. And I want to pause on the significance of those words because it's not like God is playing some game of hide and seek. where, Moses pops up and goes, here I am. He's saying, here I am. The Hebrew is hinor. And actually, it's usually translated everywhere else in the Hebrew, apart from this text, and maybe one or two more, it's translated as look or behold. It's like Moses saying, God, look, here I am. Behold me. God, look at me. God, don't miss me. God, here I am. There's so many levels to that one phrase. There's this physical God. Here I am in the physical. But I think there's also another side to this where Moses says, God, here I am. God, I'm coming to you as I am. With all my history, all my frustrations, all my fears, all my failures, all my doubts, all my regrets. God, this is me. Here I am. There's a great verse in Deuteronomy 4, which is part of a huge speech that Moses gives towards the end of his life. And he gives this speech to the people of Israel. And he's talking about the future. And he says, so at some point, you're going to find yourselves in a place you don't want to be. And this is what Moses says. If from there you seek the Lord your God, you will find him. If you seek him with all your heart and with all of your soul. I don't know where you are. I don't know where you're going to be, but if from there. I don't know what your life is like, but if from there. I don't know how many mistakes you've made, but if from there. I don't know how you got there. I don't know why you got there, but if from there you'll seek God, you'll find him. Here I am, God. Here I am. And there's a little bit of a submission in this where Moses says, God, I'm available. Here I am, God, you've got my full attention. And all this is rolled into this one incredible phrase, God, here I am. I've heard you. You've got my attention. See me. You've got all of me. You've got all my fears, all my failures, all my frustrations, all my hopes, all my dreams. You've got all my past, all my future. God, here I am. All of me. Can I ask how many of us, when we hear or sense God calling us, our response is, God, here I am? Because sometimes our response is God can call us and we can go, okay, God, there they are. Or God, talk to them instead. They're the ones you want, not me. Or instead of saying, here I am, we'll say, okay, God, I'll be there now in a minute. Let me just finish this first. And then we say, oh, God never speaks to me. Can I suggest it's not because God doesn't speak, it's because we've chosen to put the other voices first. And God would say, he would call your name, and the response is, God, here I am. And Moses gives us this great model, these great words. And I want to encourage you, when you feel like God is trying to get your attention, you drop everything and say, here I am. I love this old song, Here I Am, wholly available. Not just a bit of me, I'm wholly available. As for me, I'll serve the Lord. And God says, don't come any closer. Take off your sandals. You're standing on holy ground. And again, I think there's multiple layers to this. Because I think that the first thing is God is saying to Moses, stop running. Stop running. Take off your running shoes. You've been running from Pharaoh for 40 years. It's time to stop. Take off your running shoes. Second is this, when you take off your shoes, culturally it's something you do when you went into someone's house. So you would take off your shoes so you wouldn't bring your dust and your dirt into the house of your host. And so when God says take off your shoes, it's not about the ground, by the way. Because this dirt was the same as this dirt was the same as that dirt was the same as this. It wasn't about the ground, it was about the presence of God. You can't bring your dirt in here. You've got to keep it out there. Now, thankfully, we have Jesus. And I need to add that in. We have the cross. We don't need to kind of do that anymore. And I want to say this in a spiritual sense, please keep your shoes on. In a physical sense, please keep your shoes on. Keep your feet to yourself. But when God speaks, one of the things he invites us to is consecration. He says, stop running, stand still, but leave your mess out there. Leave your sin behind. Come and get close. And then he says to Moses, I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And when Moses heard this, he covered his face because he's afraid to look at God. When God speaks, he'll give you a confirmation. You'll know it's God. I don't know about you, but if you use an iPhone, and I'm not advocating iPhones, I'm just saying I know they do this. If you've got an iPhone and your phone rings, and sometimes it's a number that you might not have in your contacts, but iPhones have this amazing ability, and I don't understand it. When your phone rings and you don't have the number in your contacts, your screen will come up with maybe. Maybe it's such and such. Maybe it's this person. Maybe it's John. Maybe it's Susie. Maybe it's this company or business that you've done something with. And that kind of maybe gives you a little bit of confidence to pick up the phone. Because I don't know about you, if I get a phone call from a number I don't recognize, straight to answer phone. Or if I get a call from a withheld number, straight to answer phone. But when it says maybe, and it's a name I recognize, you know what? That gives me the confidence to pick up the phone. And then when I hear their voice and they introduce themselves, and I know it's them, and I wonder how many of us have had maybe God moments. Maybe God's calling. Maybe God is ringing. And what we've done is we've looked at the maybe and gone, oh, straight to answer phone. Rather than pick it up, we've gone, well, why would God talk to me? Why would God be ringing me? That can't be God. Surely God would want to speak to someone else, not me. Why would God? Or we say, sorry, God, not today. God, I'm too busy. Maybe when we have those moments where it's maybe God, what would happen if we said, here I am? And then God speaks. And then he reveals himself. And he says, this is God calling. I love Eurovision when they go through all the countries and go, this is France calling. I think sometimes you get this. This is God calling. And God will make it really, really clear that it's him, but we've got to be willing to pick up the phone. We've got to be willing to pick up on the maybe. But it's interesting in this passage, he doesn't just confirm who God is, he confirms what he knows. It says, the Lord told Moses, I've seen the oppression of my people. I've heard the cries of distress. I'm aware of their suffering, so I've come down to rescue them. And it always amazes me how we think God might be surprised by our prayers. I won't pray that because I think that will surprise God. I won't pray that because I think God will be shocked. Or we pray as if God, I've heard some brilliant prayers, and I wonder, is this a prayer or a monologue? Because you're giving God the full story. Oh God, my brother, who was born in Newbridge in 1946. And he went to Newbridge Comprehensive. And then he worked down at the GPO. And when we give God this enormous narrative, and God's going, get on with it, I know. Or sometimes we pray, I can't tell God that because what if God found out? Psalm 139 says this, Lord, you've examined my heart, and you know everything about me. Look, David said this, you know when I sit down or stand up. You know my thoughts. You see me when I travel. You know everything I do. You know what I'm going to say even before I know it. Guess what? God knows. He knows your thoughts. He knows your feelings. He knows your fears. He knows the things you're fighting. David says this, such knowledge is too wonderful. I don't know how he knows. Because it's too wonderful, it's too great for me to understand. If you read Revelation 2 and 3, Jesus is dictating a message to John, to the different churches in the area. And 12 times Jesus says, I know, I've seen, I've heard. And if you look all through the Bible, we don't have time to look at them, but there's so many times when God speaks, he confirms something he knows. And he does that not to condemn you, but it's to give an assurance of who God is, that nothing surprises God, and he's in control. He's the God who knows. He's the God who sees. He's the God who hears. So that should give us confidence. The next thing he gives us is he gives us our commission. He says to Moses, go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people. That's Moses' commission. That's Moses' assignment. And so often God will speak to us in that order. He'll say, hey, let's get anything that's a barrier between me and you out of the way. I need to consecrate you. I need to kind of get us right. And then he'll confirm something about either himself or he'll confirm something about us, and then he'll commission us. Then he'll give us our instructions. And if you remember last week, he might give us direction, but he won't give us details. But he'll call us into that commission. And the reason I use that word commission is because if you break it down, you've got two words. Our commission is actually a co-mission. We're on mission with God. This is a co-mission. We were never meant to be on some solo mission. We were meant to be on mission with God. How do I know? Moses says, who am I? God says, I'll be with you. Because we're on co-mission. We're on mission together. So not only do we get our co-mission, we actually find confidence in God's promise to be with us. What were Jesus' last words? Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. And what? Be sure of this, I am with you always. I don't know about the band back up, but I just want to tell you what's amazing about this passage. Is in the Greek, that word doesn't say surely. It's the Greek I do. And it means look. It means behold. Isn't that amazing? That when we're in Hebrews, Moses would say, look, God, I'm here. And then we move forward into Jesus' life, and Jesus would say the same thing. Look, I'm here. I'm always here. Just look. And even when we say that to God, God, who am I? God, I'm not qualified. I'm not experienced. I'm not good enough. God says, do you know what? I know. I know you're not. Get over yourself. But I'll be with you. Because you'll get your strength from me. You'll get your qualification from me. You'll get your courage from me. There's a phrase that goes around, God never ever calls people who are already equipped, but he equips those he calls. The writer of Hebrews writes this blessing. He says, may the God of peace equip you with some of what you need, a bit of what you need, all you need for doing. He'll equip you with all you need. He says this, may he produce in you every good thing that is pleasing to him. Now, does that mean you produce it? He'll produce it. You just have to receive it. Can I give you just one message for today? It's this. When you hear God speaking to you, don't beat around the bush. And I know that's a funny line, haha, Moses. But so often we do it. Because God is speaking all the time. And he wants us to get close to hear his voice, remove any obstacles that might get in the way, get our confirmation, get our clarity, and get our confidence from the sound of his voice. And then we go and do what he's calling us to do. I want to close with one last verse. It's from Isaiah, and I'd love this to be our declaration this morning. Isaiah 6. Isaiah says this, I heard the Lord asking, whom should I send as a messenger to these people? Who will go for us? Who can I send out into Newbridge? Who can I send out into the community? Who can I send out to be a messenger to the people? And Isaiah says, here I am. Send me. It's the same Hebrew, by the way. Look, here I am. Behold, God, I'm here. God, you've got my attention. God, here I am. I'm ready. Send me. Why don't we pray? We're going to end with an old song. And I've asked the band, or I haven't asked the band, or I'm going to ask the band right now, just to play this through twice. And the first time, can I encourage you not to sing? I never do that. But I want to encourage you not to sing because I want you to listen to the words. And I want you to allow God to speak to you through them. And then I want you to sing them as a declaration. Here I am, God, wholly available. As for me, I'll serve the Lord.
Laborers are few. So Lord, I give myself to help the reaping, to gather precious souls unto you. Here I am, wholly available. As for me, I will serve the Lord. The time is right in the nations for works of power and authority. God's looking for a people who are willing to be counted in His glorious victory. Here I am, wholly available. As for me, I will serve the Lord. As salt, are we ready to savor? In darkness, are we ready to be light? God's seeking out a very special people to manifest His truth and His might. Here I am, wholly available. As for Are we ready to be light? God seeking out a very special people to manifest His truth and His light. Here I am, wholly available. As for me, I will serve the Lord. As for me, I will serve the Lord. As for me. As for me, I will serve the Lord.
God, let that be our prayer this morning. Here I am. All of me. All my past. All my failures. All my mistakes. All my fears. All my dreams. Here I am. Wholly available. God, I choose not to hold anything back. As for me, I choose to serve the Lord. The writer of Hebrews says this: may the God of peace equip you with all you need for doing His will. May He produce in you, through the power of Jesus, every good thing that is pleasing to Him. All glory to Him, forever and ever. Amen. Just want to encourage you this week. Why don't you just as a challenge every morning, why don't you start with those words? Every morning when you open your eyes, God, here I am. God, here I am. And let God speak. Come and tell me next Sunday what God does in your day. When you say, God, here I am.